Welcome to the TNF podcast. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and click on that bell for notifications. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give us a follow and give us a rating. That would be fantastic. Few things to promote and talk about. I have a merchandising company called Hell's Heart Merch Company. Go on over to hellsheartco.bigcartel.com. Use the code podcast for 20% off your entire order. Find Bella Canvas Next Level Tri-Blend t-shirts if you like movies, if you like hardcore or music. We got a bunch of designs on there that are in that vein, so check it out. I think you'll like them. And my friend John Cuccinello from the band OS 101, Hogan's Heroes, has this book called Come Inside and Meet My Punk Rock Family. It chronicles all the characters that he's met within the hardcore and punk rock scene in graphic novel form. So go on over to revhq.com, check it out. A portion of the proceeds will benefit the St. Jude's Children's Hospital. So it's a great cause. It's a limited edition book. Pick one up. I think you'll like those as well. And my friend Lou Collar from the band Sick of It All is undergoing cancer treatments. We have a QR code that I'm going to throw up in the video for his GoFundMe. Please support this guy. He's awesome. His brother Pete Collar is also doing some t-shirts that are banned. It's got him, it's got Lou on there. So please go over and support. They're like one for $30 and two for $50. Please check that out. That would be excellent. All right. My guest today, he has been a staple of the Long Island and New York hardcore scenes. He's played in the likes of Mind Over Matter, ERRORTYPE 11, and most recently BEINN. They're a really cool post-hardcore rock, noise rock, all sorts of genres. It's really interesting. I'm really digging it. I've been listening to their single Run. Great song. I highly encourage you check it out. And he also ran the St. Vitus Bar in New York City. Really cool venue. Doesn't exist anymore, but I understand they're trying to start it back up again in a different location. So we'll see what happens, and I'm hoping that happens. But ladies and gentlemen, Arthur or Artie Shepherd. Thanks for being here, Artie.
Hey, thank you for having me.
What's going on with you today, man?
My chair is really squeaky. My headphones weren't working. I got all sorts of problems. No, I'm just hanging around, man. You know, I worked last night, got home super late, and but you know, I got a kid, so I got to be up super early no matter what, and so no sleep for me. But yeah, just hanging out, trying to make the best of the day.
Do you enjoy the family life?
I do. Yeah. I wish, you know, I had more money so that I could enjoy it more. But yeah, no, it's great. I do enjoy it. You know, it's I think as I've gotten older, you kind of crave it. I was a little bit of a late bloomer with all that. So I didn't have a kid till I was like 42. So, you know, I'll be like 80 when she's, you know, 20 or something.
Right.
I'm not good at
that. No, I hear you, man. And I'm not even in that, you know, life trajectory yet, but by the time I hit that too, I'll be a geriatric. So, I don't know though. I think I would enjoy it as well, but, and like you said, you know, it would benefit us if we had more money, and we can always hope for more money. That's something I'm aspiring to as well.
Yeah, it's all about having ample finances to be able to provide properly, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. My first question for you, sir, is what was your relationship with music growing up? Did you have family members that played music? Did you play in any sort of like high school bands or anything like that? And what was your relationship like? What was your first non-metal, non-hardcore concert, and then how did that seg into you getting into like the hardcore and punk rock scene?
That's a long question. Um, well, I have two much older sisters than me. And they were basically went to high school in the late 70s, early 80s. And so they were, pretty heavily into what would be like Judas Priest, AC/DC, Pink Floyd, yes. I would steal Black Sabbath. So I would steal their records all the time. And I was introduced to some pretty heavy, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like a very mindful music at a young age. So like Yes has been my favorite band since I was 10. And so that's like a big thing. But before that, I was like, my dad listened to doo-wop and oldies and the Beatles and all of that. So there was a lot of that. And the first shows I went to were all like Johnny Maestro and the Brooklyn Bridge and Gary Puckett, or like, I mean, all the doo-wop stuff, the Coasters. So I would go to all those shows with my parents and at like Westbury Music Fair and whatnot. And then, eventually I got into my own stuff via my sisters. And then uh, I guess my introduction into punk, I played in a band that was basically a cover band in high school, which we played at a place called February's in on Hempstead Turnpike, uh, which is now gone, but it was a pretty legendary place. Um, and that was like I was 15 when I did that. Um, and that was like I was super into sort of late 80s thrash metal at that point. So like my whole life had sort of I I, I was into Black Sabbath and whatnot, and I was 12, I think, and I was in eighth grade, and I was at a church fair, and I found Merciful Fate's Don't Break the Oath on vinyl for $1, and I bought it. Me and my friend bought it, and we just bought it because there was like a devil on the front, and we went to Catholic school, so we were like, oh, this is sick. And it was obviously there because some parent had taken it away from their children. That's the reason why it was on sale. And we went home and I listened to that record, and it was really like it was a life changer for me. Like it just King Diamond's voice, all the music, um, I just loved it, and that kind of sparked the seeker in me to just try and find heavier and heavier and heavier music throughout my high school life. And that's basically how that went. And when I got introduced to hardcore was through we would go to this place called Sundance in Bayshore, and everybody played there. And they would have hardcore bands open for a lot of the thrash bands or more crossover bands like DRI or Nuclear Assault. But like Sick of It All would open, or Leeway would open, or all these Killing Time, like, or Raw Deal at the time, and so we would go to see those bands, and the opening bands were all hardcore bands, and I kind of got into it from that. Uh, but it was the the crowd was sort of scary at those shows because the metalheads just got beat up by all the hardcore kids, and it was like there was a lot of gang shit going on too. Um, but they took a liking to me, and I went with like Eddie Reyes, who was in Take It Back Sunday, and Scott General George, who was in Clockwise, and a bunch of my high school friends, and they were nice to us for some reason, and so I just kind of like went into that scene a little bit. It was definitely like a Leeway was a big band for me. Leeway, Sick of It All, they were kind of like introductions to me. And then very, very quickly, I got introduced to Fugazi and stuff that was a little bit more, uh, I'm not going to say complex, but just a little bit more thinking man music, and I really like that because that was more towards my tastes with progressive rock and like, really heady thrash. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of how that happened. And then Mind Over Matter started in 1990, um, and that was really the jumping off point for me and for all the people involved in Long Island hardcore scene, which had a few bands here and there, but it wasn't really that organized. And I felt like, Mind Over Matter was like, we just had good timing. It was like we were slogging along, whatever. And then Nirvana hit and everything changed. And everybody was interested in underground music all of a sudden. So that was kind of like the juggernaut that happened behind everybody. Honestly, it was like all the music we were playing to 20 people, the same 20 people for like 2 years of our early existence. And then all of a sudden, right around when our first 7-inch came out, is when Nirvana hit. And it went from 20 people to 400 people all of a sudden overnight. And it was wild. Everybody changed the way they dressed. Everybody, all the kids that would beat you up in high school were now coming to your shows. It was a weird time. It was a very weird time. It was great.
Yeah.
It was great, but it was weird.
That's what Alex Dunn was saying, that Nirvana kind of really opened the floodgates for a lot of underground music because,
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, the aesthetic changed. All the jocks and the douchebags were suddenly showing up to all these underground and punk rock shows. And Nirvana, if you listen to Bleach, that's a punk rock album. That's a
Oh
hardcore
yeah.
album.
Oh,
Like
and no,
it's
dude, In Utero is like a borderline fucking doom record. It's like
yes.
it's so heavy, and it's funny because I didn't really listen to it at the time because I was like, it was so ubiquitous. It was like there was no point. It was like, oh, what am I going to buy an Utero for? Like, I'm just going to hear it 1,000 times. And
Right.
years later, I listened to it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to listen to it. It was around when Nirvana played at St. Vitus, and I was like, I'm going to give this record a shot. And I put it on, and I was like, this is fucking great. This sounds like a sludge fucking Melvins record. It's like a
Yeah.
sludgy version of the Melvins. And
Yes.
it's very cool, very cool. Great sounds, great songs. But I don't have to tell anybody that. I mean, they're one of the biggest bands in the world. But they what they did was something that happens every couple of years is they actually changed the culture. And they didn't mean to, but they did. And it was a drastic change, and I was just the right age to sort of reap the rewards of that. It was great, and maybe get a little bit of a head fuck because everybody was getting record deals. Everybody, it's like just across the board, and you didn't realize at the time that just because you get a record deal doesn't mean you're going to be successful. So you know,
Yeah.
it's I've had a bunch, um, and it's a hard road. So I definitely chose a hard road to go, but at the time it seemed like it was the obvious choice.
Right. And unpopular opinion, In Utero, better than Nevermind. I
I
prefer that
agree.
Steve Albini sound over Butch Vig. I just think it's more earthy. Like Neurosis Times of Grace is one of my probably favorite albums ever. And he really does a good job at capturing that raw organic sound, which I think Nirvana really kind of wanted to go for anyway, because again, they're a punk rock band. They wanted something that was a little less processed, a little less produced. And I think personally the songwriting on it's better and underrated compared to Nevermind.
I agree. Well, it was overshadowed by the Unplugged record, which I think has sold more than anything that they put out. It's definitely the one that gets played on the radio the most. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. They were a game changer in a huge way,
Yeah.
and you didn't have to be a big fan of it to see what it did to everything. And it's also like Lollapalooza was happening around that time, which was really cool because that was more of a very alternative culture thing that was, I mean, it was tied in with the major labels and all that shit. So, like Jane's Addiction was on Warner, and and they're a total freak show, that band. I mean, they were probably the biggest influence I had from that world on my music and the rest of Mind Over Matter as well. But it's like like, you know, you go to Lollapalooza and like all of a sudden, like we were saying, the jocks at your school were watching Susie and the Banshees and Nine Inch Nails and Rage Against the Machine and like, you know, like all these bands that you would, you know, maybe a year or two before they would have never cared about, and they basically would have made fun of you for listening to. And you know, so it was definitely like it's interesting, and like again, like I said, it changed the culture, and it was like it was a very exciting time. Like any, you could do anything, you could write anything. You know, there was always, you know, we talk about hardcore. Hardcore is always hardcore. It doesn't really develop or ch- change as a genre. You know what I mean? Like if if you're a hardcore band and you change a little bit, you're not a hardcore band anymore. You're something else. You know, so it's
Right.
like hardcore is always going to be chugga chugga, mosh part, fucking sing along. Here we go. You know, youth culture, participatory. You know, it's always going to be like that. And I feel like, you know, at that time everybody was so young and the genre was very young. So it was like, you know, it was a great time. It's I think it's one of the few times in history, in rock and roll history, shall we say, where, you know, the culture was really changed like that. It's like Nevermind coming out to me is the equivalent of Sergeant Pepper's coming out in '67. You know, it's like it changed the way everybody dressed and looked at music, you know, and it opened up people's minds, and then it quickly got ruined. But you know, as you do, we're America. You know, everything has to be commercialized and consumerized and fucking ruined by big money and bullshit and more. Everything has to be more, and it's just like, I don't know. You know, I'm from New York, so everything has to be more. Like it's
You see it
it's just
all.
one of those things. You know, like bigger, better, more. It's like, I don't know. I hate that shit, but you know, we live in America, so that's the way it
Right.
goes.
Is what it is. And it definitely was kind of one of those ubiquitous sounds in the mid 90s, you know, with your Soundgardens, your Alice in Chains, your Mud Honeys and stuff like that. And you know, you mentioned Jane's Addiction being an influence on Mind Over Matter. What else were you guys kind of jamming at that time? Because you guys, as far as Long Island's concerned, of all the bands that have been on here, like Long Island has had a really interesting and kind of diverse scene. And I think that's what made them so special. And what would you say that you guys were kind of listening to at the time that kind of helped to shape your sound?
Well, it was kind of an overall um, uh, agenda, to be honest. I mean, at least from my end, you know, we were coming from a world of Biohazard and, you know, Life of Agony, uh, again, like I said, Leeway or Sick of It All, or you know, Bad Brains, shit like that, like the traditional sort of like New York hardcore stuff. And Bad Brains isn't, but you know, it was, you know, when you get to 92, things sort of change. So you get Fugazi, and Fugazi was hardcore adjacent, but not a hardcore band in any way, shape, or form. And they're taking influence from Gang of Four and Wire and fucking reggae, you know. So it's like, which a lot of punk did take from that, but it was just an interesting time for music. There was so much, like alternative was this huge mishmash of different types of music. So you got almost metal, Alice in Chains, right? Or even some Jane's Addiction. Or Jane's Addiction, I would look at as more of like a, like the Ritual Del Habitual sounds like a fucking psych prog record to me. The second half of it, it's like one of my favorite things ever. And you know, and then you got the basics. You know, it's all there. Like we went out of our way to not, well, like at least I did, went to not write like obligatory mosh parts. So if you go to a Modern Matter show, and it's so funny when we do reunions, I can see people like so psyched to see us, but then realizing that this isn't going to be a typical hardcore show. This is actually a show that you watch the band, as opposed to like it's all about me in the pit and singing along. You know, it's like it's weird. There's fucking weird time signatures. There's like all sorts of shit going on that a lot
Right.
of people weren't doing. A lot of most hardcore bands weren't doing that shit in the early '90s. You know, if like you wanted that, if you wanted just fucking balls to the wall metal hardcore, go to a Neglect show. We often did play together,
Mhm.
but you know, it's like we were just a little bit different. You know, and maybe a tiny bit disappointing to people, you know, or it's like George would always say that our singer would just be like, you could see it in people's faces where they're like ready to mosh. And like, we just never do it. We never go in there. You know, you listen to like
Right.
a VOD song, especially the early VOD stuff. They always had this obligatory mosh part at the end of the song.
Right.
And, you know, and that was awesome for them. And it was like, it was almost like giving the crowd what they want. And I
Right.
just was like so against that. I was like, oh fuck
Yeah.
that, man. Like we're punk kids. We're gonna do everything against that. And we were pretty heavily influenced by bands like Born Against and some of the like more heavy left wing leaning ABC No Rio style bands, um, which was kind of like just kind of coming into formation in like 89, 90, 91, 92. Rorschach was another one that was big. That was especially big for me
Yeah.
because they blended hardcore and metal so much. And I just thought that they just had it, but their recordings are terrible. But like, you
Yes.
know, you knew there was something great in there and like seeing them live was just fucking incredible for me. So like that was a huge influence too. And that was sort of like I'm not going to say the spazzy side of what we did, but we did a lot of hectic, off time, weird time signature shit. And especially like you get to Art of Manipulation, which was our last record that came out in 1995. That record was put together in the studio as is. Like we knew how the order of songs was going to be. We recorded them in that order. We did, we handed the record label the mix of the record and it was all sequenced already. So everything flowed into each other. The whole thing was done. And it was very well thought out, except for the last song, which wasn't really thought out, but we had to put that on there. But like, you know, the first like 6, 7 songs are really, really well thought out. And it was just weird for that time. It was more of a noise rock record um than a hardcore record for sure. But it's the one that everybody references. It's like the recording is really good. It sounds like it could have been done yesterday. To this day, it still sounds fucking incredible. We just remastered all the records and we put them up on streaming. So if anybody's a Mind Over Matter fan, or I don't know how many are out there right now, but all the stuff that's on streaming is remastered. It doesn't say it, but it is. Uh, and I thought it came out really, really, really great. Um, but you know, like again, it was an exciting time, and the world was it was ours. You know, we could do anything we wanted musically, and people were showing up to the shows, which is always really encouraging for any guy in a, you know, any person in a band. You know, to every time you play a show, there's shit tons of people there, and you're part of a scene. That's like very encouraging to you to continue going and developing your art. You know, it's like it's exciting. It gives you self confidence, which is what you know I've been living on for 30 years.
Absolutely. And you guys definitely were a game changer. Then you went and started doing Error Type 11, which I've always been curious as to what's the name? Where's the origin of that? And yeah, kind of talk about that band a little bit because I know you guys did a few recordings and then you kind of went away and then you started doing stuff again. What was the story?
Yeah, so basically, like I broke up Mind Over Matter because I left the band to start a band with Walter Schreifels and Quicksand, um, and that band was called World's Fastest Car. We went from like '95 to '97. Um, and I walked away from that because it was kind of a shit show. He was signed to Island Def Jam. It was all, like I could write a book about that fucking experience. It was pretty wild. But when I left World's Fastest Car, I started ERRORTYPE 11 almost immediately. Um, and then Walter had started a label called Some Records with this guy Matt Pincus and Sammy Siegler, and then they signed ERRORTYPE. Um, So that was like a whole thing. And ERRORTYPE 11 was an old Mac error um, that our guitar player Phil, who was in Clockwise, Long Island bands, he was a graphic designer, and so he used Macs all the time. And one day he was like, "I got this ERRORTYPE 11. It's a pretty cool name." And I was like, "Okay." I'm like, oh, "Don't ever ask me to name a band. I'm fucking pretty bad at it." So we went with it, and it stuck. And yeah, and we put out a couple records. We put out Now it's 3 full lengths, but at the time it was 2. Phil quit, and we had been we it was a that was a weird band because we were being courted by major labels constantly, and it never really clicked. And it was like one of these things where like my voice had changed over the course of touring America and playing basements and stuff. Like just to get over the music, I was really, really projecting, and it changed the way my voice sounded. And it was really like a modern rock, Midwest rock voice. It was like this like really fucking deep and whatnot. And so we were kind of shooting for that. It was like, why we got all this interest, like let's do it. So when Phil left, we changed the name of the band, but it was basically the same band. And we brought in Tom Capone from Quicksand, um, and he became Phil's replacement. And we were called Instruction at that point. And we went to England for 6 months. We got a record deal with Geffen within 6 months of our existence, which was crazy because basically it was the same songs, but we just changed our name. And it was like restart. It was like clicking the fucking restart button. And it just happened. It happened very quickly. And it was wild. So that was from 2002 to 2005. We were on Geffen. We made a $500,000 record that got a soft release and got totally fucked up and toured the world and opened for Metallica, opened for like did arena tours. It was a wild time, fucking really wild time.
Wow. What was opening for Metallica like?
So that was a crazy story. So we played the first Download Festival in Donington, uh, England, and we were
Yeah.
on the main stage. We had only been a band for 6, 7 months, and we were on the main stage at Donington, which was fucking insane. And so we loaded in that day. It was like we were on at 11:45 a.m. We played our set to about 50 to 100,000 people. I don't really know. It was just like a fucking
Wow.
sea of people.
Oh,
We had an incredible set. It was just like fucking ridiculous. And we got off stage, and now it's like what, like 12:30 or something. I go back to the canteen, and I literally chugged like 6 beers. I was like completely shot from the day. I was just like, rah, fucking down on them. I'm in the canteen. Billy Corgan sitting next to me. I'm like, holy shit, that's Billy Corgan. And it's like I'm just getting drunker and drunker. And about like an hour, a half hour, whatever passes, and my manager comes up to me, and he's like, "Yo, you guys want to play again?" And we were like, "Yeah, like we're gonna play again. This is crazy. We just played on the main stage." They were at the time. Download was only 2 stages. Now it's like 11. And they were like, "Yeah, a band canceled." As it turned out, it was a band called Chevelle
I
that had
remember them.
canceled.
Yeah.
They didn't make their flights. I would later tour with years later. I would tour with them quite a bit. So we go over to the main stage, to the second stage, sorry, which was a gigantic tent that fit about like 10,000 people. So it was like, that's the small stage, like ridiculous. These European festivals are insane. And
Insane.
so we were supposed to use Flogging Molly's gear. And they were like, we went up to their roadies and we were like, yo, dude, we need your gear. Like we were told you can use it. They're like, fuck off. So we had to somehow get gear. We like fucking, and in the interim of like setting up all the gear and dealing with all this shit, I look behind this big curtain. It's on stage, and there is a bunch of amps with Metallica's logo on them. And I'm
Oh,
like, fuck, Metallica's playing? Like, this is totally unannounced. It's called the Download Festival, which the whole thing of it was that you downloaded people's music. And, you know, Metallica was in like all this fight with Napster at the time. So it was like, you know, it was very strange. But whatever. So at that point I'm like, okay, Metallica's playing. Like, let's go on stage. So we go on stage and there's maybe the tent was like half full at this point. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna tell everybody Metallica's playing. So we can play to more people. So the first song ends, and I'm like, hey, so there's a bunch of amps behind that curtain with M's on them. Metallica's playing after us. I'm just letting you know that, you know, so I would suggest if you got a good spot, just stay because Metallica's going to be on stage soon.
Oh God.
Within 5 minutes, I'm not kidding, there was 50,000 people in this fucking
Oh,
tent. So we got to play again to like a main stage crowd. We changed the set for the second set, not that anybody would have noticed. And it was fucking awesome. And we did all this. We only had one EP out, which was fucking crazy. We had 4 songs out. And it was just, it was a fucking crazy experience. Brand New played after us. I always forget that there was a buffer band. And then Metallica went on. And it was fucking awesome. It was just so cool. Like, and
yeah.
Metallica ruined the show for the rest of the bands because they were supposed to play like 40 minutes. They played for like 2 hours. So the whole show got fucked up. But I mean, it was really cool. And like we were, you know, we were backstage hanging out with them afterwards. They were just like fucking hanging out. It was totally insane. It was like completely surreal experience. But it was, you
Yeah.
know, we got to play twice, and we got to play twice in front of a lot of people, and it changed the trajectory of the band at that point. Because like then we got added to like Reading and Leeds festivals, and we were doing all these other tours, and then we moved to Los Angeles to record a record, and you know, with big Bob Ezrin who produced Pink Floyd The Wall. It was fucking crazy. It was just a, you know, I could sit here and talk about it until everybody would get bored of my fucking stories, but it was a crazy experience. I mean, I you know, later that year I got to meet Steve Jobs at the Universal Christmas party, which was like
Oh wow.
totally insane. You know, I was
Yeah.
like, I just crazy stories, man. You know, I was like,
Yeah.
I kind of yelled at him. I was like, he had it's hard to explain, but they used to like they would send laptops to famous people, right? And it's almost like where famous people get endorsed by equipment companies, so they get a discount or they get it for free. And as I was told him, I was like, I remember Jimmy Iovine introduced me to him, and I was like, yeah, I was like, I saw you sent the laptop to Sheryl Crow. I was like, she can afford her own, man. You should send them to people like us. Like we could use them, you know, like we don't, you know, and Jimmy Iovine was just like, please go away.
Uh,
Steve Jobs is like, yeah, okay, loser, bye. It was so
so he didn't
funny.
send you one.
No, he didn't. I was fucking wasted when
Oh.
I said this. I was just like, what?
Oh.
Steve Jobs. But I mean, you know, but Jimmy did
What an
introduce him to
asshole.
me. Yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah. I mean, he's
Was he
known as
wearing
an
that
asshole. It's
black
okay.
turtleneck that he wears, or doesn't he wear
I
like
can't,
all the
dude.
same?
I barely remember. I just remember like the sort of incidents and me saying something, and then everything else is kind of a blank. Honestly,
Wow. That's
it
wild,
was a
man. Yeah,
Christmas
like you
party. I
said,
was
kind of
shit
a
faced.
real surreal kind of experiences. What caused the dissolution and then the subsequent resurgence
Of what?
of error type?
I mean, well, no, we just did a couple of reunions. I mean, we broke up because Phil left the band, and then you know, a couple of years later, I don't know when I think our first reunion was maybe 2011 at Mercury Lounge, and or maybe 2009. But yeah, we just booked a couple of shows, and we sold them out, which we were very surprised about. So we just, you know, we never really toured a lot. We did Fest down in Florida. We play here or there whenever, you know, everybody can get together. I mean, everybody's in different states. And Adam got Seisha, his one of his other bands, back together, and so they've been touring a lot, and they're a lot more popular than ERRORTYPE was. So, you know, he kind of does that, which takes up a lot of the space that ERRORTYPE might do shows in, but which is okay. You know, like I'm doing my thing, so I don't really need the ERRORTYPE thing to keep me busy.
In the interim, though, you did Saint Vitus Bar, and I understand there's a pretty like storied history on that as far as like the bands that played there. Like I read that the surviving members of Nirvana actually did like a somewhat of a reunion show there with a bunch of guest vocalists and whatnot. And I also
Yeah,
understand that
there's a picture
you
from it.
guys got.
There you go.
Oh, how about that? Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
Joan Jett.
Oh shit.
Um,
How about that?
yeah, man. Yeah. So St. Vitus, we opened in 2011, um, and it was, we were just bartenders in Greenpoint, and we wanted to open up a place of our own. We did that. There was a stage in the place. We had built it out. It was a rough space, um, and we started having a few shows here and there, but there was a lot of pressure to pay back our investors, and that pressure got so heavy that we basically had to have shows to bring people down because Greenpoint. I don't know where you are right now or if you've ever lived in Brooklyn, but at the time Greenpoint was it was still a little shitty when we moved in, where especially where we moved in, where we opened up, and it was it changed very quickly. It's like any of these gentrified neighborhoods in Brooklyn. It was like all the people who would come to our place just as regulars, they all moved. They all moved to Ridgewood or Bushwick. So, we were under a lot of pressure to have shows and get people down there. And the only way we got people down there to the butt end of Greenpoint was to have shows. So that's what we did. And it just went, we, I was I was still touring a lot at that time, and I had enough experience to know what bands wanted when they showed up, and I very much wanted to model it after the European style, which was, like it was just a good experience. Like you went, people were nice. You didn't have a douchey sound guy. You got some food. They gave you a decent amount of liquid, whatever it might be, whatever you want. We just wanted to create the experience to be amazing for the band, for the crowd. You wanted the sound to be as good as possible, and it's like the Nirvana thing was a culmination of all of that. Sort of goodwill. There was a guy who was the head of Dave Grohl's production company, who had played the bar before in his band, and we went back to Dave, and he was just like, you gotta do this. You gotta play this place. It's fucking awesome. Because at the time, the Foo Fighters would play like pizza shops and like weird shit. So when they were deciding on a place to play after the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, our name came up, and we wound up getting it. And it was amazing. It was an incredible experience. I felt like I was watching TV. It was like what the fuck is it? It just didn't seem real.
Right.
Like I can't even I can't explain, like it didn't even like, after the show, I was downstairs with Dave and his wife, and we were just like hanging out, drinking beers, talking, and it was super surreal, like,
Yeah.
and those guys played two sets that night. The set they played at Vitus was 2 hours long. It was
Wow.
crazy. It was like, my favorite was Jay Mascis singing for them, because like to sort of like see Jay Mascis play those solos and just do his guitar thing over Nirvana songs, it was like obvious where there was a heavy influence there from to Kurt Cobain and Christopher Novoselic and Dave Grohl of Dinosaur Jr. and and Sonic Youth too, like Kim Gordon sang, St. Vincent, which was like sort of a newer thing, and Joan Jett was fucking awesome.
She's
She's
awesome.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
really really cool. It was just like we were so lucky to get it, but I really felt like it was the result of us doing some good shit on our end and not knowing who we were doing it for. It was like, and it's just like treating everybody equal type thing, because you never know.
Right.
You never know, man.
They shut you guys down for some what seems like petty reasons, though.
Yeah, yeah, it was cool, and you know, I think also this guy Jim was very adamant that Dave would love the club. He's like, oh, he's gonna love this place. His Voivod shit back there, and like all this is all the stuff he loves, and you know, he was right. You know, not that he could spend a lot of time in the bar because, like, you know, he did walk in the door, go straight to the bar, do a shot with the bartender, and then go downstairs, which I thought was
Right.
pretty cool.
What I
Yeah,
was
it was.
saying though was like you guys got shut down by the police, and it seemed like it was for some pretty like petty shit. Like what happened exactly?
We got shut down by the Department of Buildings because our building was not legal. Um, well, I'm not going to say it wasn't legal. It had problems. The thing about that is that almost every building in New York City has problems, quote unquote. Uh,
Mm,
it's just because you know it's old infrastructure, and they keep changing the rules. And you know, it's like we didn't know that it had those problems until pretty far into our existence, and then we spent quite a bit of time and energy trying to fix it. And we had a guy who hated us because we had 86'd him. We had kicked him out of the bar
oh,
numerous times, and he wanted to ruin our lives. He stated that in an email to us, and you know, he tried with 311 calls. He did a lot of stuff over the years, and then eventually, I guess he, you know, that sort of like Department of Buildings stuff, all that shit is it's public knowledge now. And when we opened, it wasn't really public knowledge. You had to like go someplace and pull out a C of O, but then nowadays it's just an app. And you go on it and you put in an address, and you know it's like so they saw our Achilles heel and just created like 10 fake Twitter accounts, kept hammering the DOB, calling 311, putting things on the DOB website until finally they showed up and we hadn't fixed the problem in time. We tried,
wow.
but it was just, you know, we would have had that not happened, we'd still be open, to be honest. You know, and we would have still been trying to make the building legal, but you know, it was just we got a little too popular to get away with it anymore. You know, it's pretty much what
Right, right.
happened. You know, it was like it was just we were just too well known, and this guy just went out of his way. I mean, that's the thing in New York. It's like everybody. There's always going to be somebody who's going to complain. You're always bothering somebody, and if you have Achilles heels like that, it's going to come back to haunt you. But
Right.
the Department of Buildings definitely went over the top with what they did. They should have just fined us and given us a chance to correct it, but they didn't. They just vacated, and once they vacate, that's it. You're done. And we had a discrepancy with our landlord after that, and then that was it. We had to go. So that was basically that's the story in a nutshell. It's much longer than that. Um, I would love to do a true crime podcast around it because it's a really interesting story. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's stuff that you can't prove it. Like I can't prove who these people were, and you can't
Right.
sue them for libel or slander because what they were saying was actually true. You know,
Right.
so it's you know, my advice to anybody who opens a music venue: make sure you got your ducks in a row if you're going to make a lot of noise because you're going to bother somebody. Always.
Sure.
But this guy
Yeah.
particularly, this guy was a Nazi. I mean, he was Zeke. The last time I saw him, he was Zeke Heiling out in front of the bar. So
Is that why he was 86? Because he was
yeah,
kind of causing
it's a long
trouble?
story. We gave him multiple chances, but he was calling our bouncers N words, and then he was Zeke Heiling, and like he just said that we were lying about all this stuff, and it was just like, dude, like how many problems are you going to cause before
Right.
you know? It's like he's just a problem, but you know
Sure.
it is what it is, and you know no harm no foul at this point.
Right. Well, when people feel spurned, they're definitely going to try to go after you. I'm actually in a similar situation. These individuals watch the show. They know what they fucking did, but yeah, they'll go after you with the whole whatever arsenal that they have. But you guys are trying to get kicked off again, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've been trying for a year and a half. Um, it's the real estate market in New York City is difficult to say the least. And if you're not a multi-billionaire, it's hard. But yeah, we got some stuff cooking, and hopefully it's all going to come out relatively soon, sooner than later. But yeah, it's really exciting. Um, it it's a crazy thought that we might jump in again to doing this, but everything has to be ducks in a row, ready to go, and we got to make a splash with all of it. So I'm excited. I'm excited because I feel like I just want to get back to work. I want to get back to doing the things that I did. None of us are in this to make $1 zillion. It's not the industry that you're going to do that in, but it is a way of giving back in a way, but also just giving people a shot and just having a job that you actually know what you're doing, and you can give. I love seeing young bands come and like have great sound and great lights and like really get that experience to give their best show to a crowd that like they've never done before. And it's like on the way up they do that, and it's like we have a litany of bands that did that at St. Vitus, um, and are now like really really well known. And I love that opportunity to be able to do that, because I wish I got a lot of advantages, like Nirvana becoming famous and changing the culture. That was sort of my advantage that I got. Nowadays things are much different and it's harder to break through, um, which sounds crazy because social media and the internet should make it easier to break through, but it's totally not, because now there's
Right.
like 100,000 more bands, and there's all these walls up that you got to get over. And it's if you're not in the corporate algorithm, you're kind of
Yeah.
fighting the good fight. It's hard.
Right. Yeah. 100%. 100%. Artie, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Stay in college. Um, that's number
Really?
one. Yeah, I should have stayed in college, at least to finish and get your degree. You know, I I don't feel like it was totally worth it in the early '90s, but like I don't know, it's just I like to finish what I start, and it's one of
Right.
those loose ends that I never finished. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna say something like do what you love, because that's bullshit. Yeah, Artie, do what you love. Well, I did, and it's been a hard road, but I've also had a lot of great experiences, and I'm super lucky to have gotten out, even being still alive, to be honest. Um, yeah, I mean, I would have continued producing records. I would have learned how to engineer properly. I wish I had done that. I produced the Sons of Abraham record, and I produced the Silent Majority Life of a Spectator record, which is,
Great
to me,
records.
yeah, to me, the Silent Majority record especially is sort of the pinnacle of Long Island hardcore. It's everything about Long Island hardcore that's great. Um, from the lyrics to the music, it's not it sounds different, it looks different. The lyrics are very specifically Long Island. It was a really fun experience to produce that record, and like basically I did it. I didn't get paid shit, so it's not like I did it for the money, but I did it because I loved Silent Majority, and I wanted them to have a really good experience in the studio. And at that point, when I was in World's Fastest Car, I was in the studio so much. I had so much studio experience that I knew I could guide them into making their songs as good as they could be. And as it turned out, like, to be honest, they taught me more than I led them. They were so good, such good players, and such good, like Tommy was just like the best front man. And I sort of like guided him a little bit into being like more of a singer than a hardcore singer. Um, but basically that just comes down to like, hey, double that line, or make that line a shout, so that people like, 'cause you're basically giving people a blueprint as to what to do live. It's like, hey, this is the
Mhm.
part where you sing along. Just stuff like that. Really simple
Sure.
shit. But Tommy didn't need my guidance, and it was just a great experience. And I wish I was so wrapped up in doing my own thing that I never followed through with doing more of a production thing. And nowadays, if you can't engineer for real, you can't really be a producer. It's just not, you know, nobody hires like a separate guy who just sits there and is a cheerleader for the band and changes your songs. Like nobody has the budget for that shit. So,
Right.
it's the way it
Yeah.
rolls now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, like you said, Silent Majority, they're like the voice of Long Island hardcore. And, I can relate with that, like finishing what you start. That's something that's always kind of been difficult for me. And, there's so many projects that I started back in the day that I wish I'd kind of had seen to fruition, but life is still going. So who knows? Maybe that's something you could revisit one of these days.
Uh, I don't know, man. I'd rather just get St. Vitus open again and I want to provide through that. It's at this point, like that's one thing I really know how to do is
Hmm.
live music and live production and whatnot, and I really enjoy it. Um, I also love being in the studio, but I'll stick to producing my own stuff. Unless if somebody came to me and asked me, I would gladly go in the studio for little to nothing, just to help. Like I just really would always wish back then. I feel like there was more of uh, there was you were walking into weird situations when you went into the studio. You were a little bit blindsided. Now I think people have a little bit more of an idea of what they're walking into. These young kids all have garage band. They kind of know how to record themselves to start. So, they don't need as much guidance as a kid who walks in and sees the big reel to reel tape machine and this big board and all this stuff, doesn't know what a click track is. It's, all of that stuff it comes from experience. So it's definitely a different thing now, without a question.
Sure. Yeah, Taylor from Orange 9mm was saying that back in the day, recording studios just completely filled a room. And then once people had the capacity to produce on their computers, all that other stuff was just obsolete. And, all these people that had been like these tenured producers were just like, what the
Yeah.
fuck,
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, they all had to relearn what they were doing. But they didn't realize that people were gonna be taking their jobs. Sorry, uh, but yeah, it's totally interesting the way things have changed. And Taylor's right, and part of that also is the barrier of entry. So that's the thing is like back then you had to have a lot of money to go in the studio and record, and so for the most part you were going to have a label or somebody backing you to pay for that recording. That doesn't exist anymore. And
No.
it's like so there were these barriers of entry that as you developed as a band, that's why demos don't exist anymore. It's like like you had a demo and that demo helped you get a record contract of some sort, and then the label would pay for you to go to a real studio and record, and then you record your album, and then your album would go out to the press, and like maybe some press guys would enjoy it and they'd write about you, without your label having to buy $10,000 worth of advertising. And there was all sorts of, the differences were vast, and it was great. I feel like now there's no barrier of entry. It's just like, yeah, you can record something and put it up on Spotify, and no one's going to hear it, for the most part. But the bands that like, or you put it up on TikTok and then it goes viral, and then some fucking label thinks that they're gonna cash in on your bullshit influencer stuff. I mean, it's all fucked. And like I just,
Yeah.
for me, I don't want to live in that world. I don't want to think about it. I want to, like, let's fuck AI, fuck all that shit. There's always going to be the underground. There's always going to be this people who want that visceral experience of seeing a band live or picking up a record, or like it's always going to be there. It might not be mainstream, but it's something, and it's there for us. And it's unfortunate that most people can't make a living off of it. But how many fucking musicians made a living in the past? I mean, it's a fucking awful industry if that's what you want.
Yeah.
It's like I think about myself, and I consider myself to be a total failure, but I've had experiences that less than 1% of people who put out records have had.
Exactly.
So like other people look at me and go like, you've had 2 major label record deals, and you're like, you put out 20 albums, and I was like, you're really successful. And it's like, it's all relative, man.
Yeah.
I'll chalk it up to I've had a lot of great experiences. I've had a lot of fun, shit ton of fun, way too much fun.
Well, and to me, that just seems to be the most important thing, like there's not too many people that can say that they've done or experienced the same things as yourself,
Right. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But you also sacrifice a lot, and that's kind of the hard part. You sacrifice
trade-off,
a tremendous amount, whether it be relationships or money or careers, all that time that I should have been developing a career of whatever sort. I was not doing that, but luckily what I was able to do was develop life skills that enabled St. Vitus to happen. So and who knew? It was like, I didn't fucking know. Things just fell into place. It's like timing and luck, and like when you get the opportunities, you grab them and you go. And with St. Vitus, honestly, I had no idea that those were the opportunities. I was just like, the 3 of us who did it full time were just like so busy keeping it alive and keeping the doors open that we didn't even think about what was going on around us. It's only in retrospect do we now look at it and go, oh, that was really cool. And it's like, we know that lightning isn't going to strike twice. It'll strike in a different way. And I'm excited to have a new adventure and, do something fucking amazing that other people can share with us. It'd be fucking great. I can't wait.
Yeah, man, definitely. All right. So we talked about this a little bit, but what are you watching? What are you reading? What are you listening to? I know you're a big Law and Order fan.
Yeah, no. I'm currently reading the Budgie, the drummer from Susie and the Banshees autobiography. Pretty heady stuff. I'm listening to, I listen to all sorts of political podcasts. So I listen to extreme right and extreme left just to kind of, do that whole critical thinking thing.
Balance, sure.
I've been thinking about cutting myself off from the news and podcasts recently, not music podcasts, but just news stuff. Just like, because I want to go back to when I was thinking about how like my life doesn't change just because I know some sort of news information. You know what I mean? Like my day will be exactly the same without the stress. It's just like what's going on doesn't really affect my everyday life, but I can't help myself. I'm like addicted to it. And that sucks. It sucks.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. And I'd call it going back to being 8 years old, where you're just like, I see my daughter and she just kind of goes through life like, la, 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 la. It's like the things that are important to her have nothing to do with the stress of like the stock market or all of these bullshit made up fake economy things that the adults have to deal with. So I'm thinking about it, but I can't do it. I can't. Tried really hard, man. I can't.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah,
well,
that's
liberating
when I'm listening music. I can't even pinpoint one thing I listen to. I got Badfinger up there. I listen to a lot of early 70s rock music. I also have to listen to my own stuff a lot. I've put out 2 records in the past 2 months. One is the Twin, which is this. record,
Cool.
and which I play lead guitar in and sing backup vocals. And the other is Ben, which is why I'm on here to promote that.
Yeah.
And it's I get caught up in continuous writing and like that's kind of a continuous process for me. It's like it never really stops. So you listen to a lot of your own stupid recordings and demos so that you can improve upon that. It's unfortunately it's a bit of a fucking echo chamber, but there's only so much time in the day.
Yeah. Well, and then with Ben, which that name threw me for a loop, and Chris Enriquez, who plays drums in your band, actually had to clue me into the pronunciation of that. Which, by the way, special thanks to him. He's a hardworking guy. He's always on the go, and he's gonna be on the show eventually. But yeah, he was telling me about the project, and like I said, I'm really digging on it. It's got that real kind of like I would even say kind of a doomy sound, but like real earthy post-hardcore kind of rustic sound to it. So what's kind of the plans for the group? Like what do you guys got in the future?
I mean, it's hard to tour. So I think we're gonna go out in the spring for a little bit. We're just playing local shows, trying to capitalize on the record coming out. But yeah, we're writing still. I mean, I like it. This album was mixed and mastered in January of 2024. So 2020, but yeah, January 2024. So that's almost 2 years. And so it took a while to get it out. So in the meantime, we lost a drummer, gained a drummer, and I wrote basically 2 albums worth of material. So we've been. I want to get back in the studio. I want to record. I want to record an EP this time. I like albums are just too much. Like nobody gets through it. It's like you put out an album and it's like 3 songs and then 6 songs nobody's gonna fucking get to, which is just for me as a songwriter is heartbreaking. It's just
Yeah.
it kind of just the way it rolls with digital streaming. It sucks. It's a new paradigm, and I don't ever want to lose doing albums, but I also understand that modern life people don't necessarily have time to listen to a whole album, and you only have a short amount of time to really grab people. Um, but on the other hand, I don't give a fuck. So, you know, it's like I'm not trying to fucking get signed to a big label or get famous or have my songs all. It's like we just put out what we write and we play shows and the shows are super fun because we do a lot of improvising on stage and which makes it way more fun. Um, yeah, it's loose and like you were saying, like the style of music is loose too. Like post-hardcore is a very broad term. It's like you can get all sorts of shit out of that. It's like alternative. It's the same thing. I think it's just alternative, but for hardcore adjacent people. It's like
Sure.
it's pretty
That's a
much
good
it.
way of describing it, actually.
Emo
Yeah.
is post-hardcore. It's like emo was
Yeah.
hardcore kids who started to try to write songs. And some of them did it well, some of them didn't do it well. Um, Many of them got very famous. It's post-hardcore is a very broad term, and so I kind of write records in a tradition of like 70s classic rock. So like a Led Zeppelin record has all sorts of different songs on it, and why not? It's like you were saying, like it's a little doomy. Yeah, there's a one song that sounds like a shoegaze doom song. It's like there's one song that sounds like has a little bit of a quicksand feel to it. I mean, it all kind of has a quicksand feel to it because that's like my favorite thing in the whole world. But it's like I I don't write in one particular thing, and I don't think that that's what people want. Like I think they want that, and I know that people who write about shit want that because they have to pin you down, but that shit's boring to me. It's like I want to write an acoustic song and I want to write a fucking 7-minute epic. You know, I want to write a 2 minute
Right.
punk song. Like, fuck it. Who cares? I'm singing on
Yeah.
all of them, so they all kind of sound like the same band. But, you know, it's like, to me, that's interesting. It's like, nobody's into one genre. There's nobody who's into underground music who's into one genre. They're into everything. They love music. So why not write all kinds of music? You know?
Yeah. Well, dude, man, I really appreciate you for coming on the show. And like I said, I'm really enjoying Ben. And real quick, explain the origin of the name Ben, because you said it was a Scottish word and it's
It's the
actually
Gaelic
pronounced
word. It's
differently.
so when you go to
Gaelic,
Scotland,
sorry.
there's you go to Scotland and like right at there's the Highlands, and right outside of Glasgow, just north of Glasgow, is more mountainous regions and whatnot. But they you go there and it's the mountains are called uh, Ben McDonald, or like, you know, like they're all called. That's it's the Gaelic word for mountain or large hill, and it's spelled a bunch of different ways. And so like, I was watching a documentary about the Lake District in Scotland, and they kept saying like, "Oh, this is Ben blah blah blah, this is Ben blah blah blah," and I was just like, "That's kind of a cool name, you know." And so I looked it up, and it wasn't taken, and the pronunciation of it was weird because they're saying Ben with a Scottish accent. They like draw out the vowels. So I was like, "How the fuck do we do this?" You know. So I looked it up, and I had like a YouTube uh, I went on, and it like they on YouTube you can put in a word and it'll pronounce it back to you. So I did that, and I was like, okay, so it's sort of Bane, but it says it's Ben. So for Americans it can be Ben, which is easy. I don't know. It all causes a lot of confusion, which is probably not good for us. But like I said, I don't give a fuck. But the
Right.
singer of this band, Biffy Clyro, who are Scottish, we opened for his side project at Vitus, and I had him say it on video. So I wanted to put that on the album, but it's gonna be our
Uh,
intro, which is like bang bang. It's very funny, but yeah, I think it's a cool name, and you know, it's also a Norse word apparently, an ancient Norse word for knife, I believe. But yeah, we'll go with the Mount version of it. So yeah, it stands for Mountain, which is, you know, which is a great band from the late '60s. So
yeah,
I I, I like it.
absolutely.
So fuck everybody else,
Yeah.
and it looks cool. That was the thing. It's like I think it looks cool, especially spelled BINN. You know, most people go BINN. I'm just like, no, it's
That's what I thought
Ben.
it was.
Like it's fine, dude. I don't expect everybody to know fucking Gaelic. So yeah,
Yeah, that's like a dead language now.
it pretty much. But it's, I mean, if you go to Scotland again, like all the mountains are called Ben something. So it's like, you know, it's very common there, and I love
Yeah.
Scotland. So anything that's Scottish, I'm in.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, I'm going to be sure to post all the links to Spotify and YouTube and wherever we can find your music and whatnot. And like I said, it's fucking awesome. I've been jamming it all week. I think you guys are doing some great things. And like I said, I really appreciate you for coming on this show. Wish we could have spent some more time. But you know, anybody that has been listening to the show, please support Ben. And hopefully, whenever St. Vitus starts kicking into full gear again, go and support any of the shows that they're doing up there. Like I'd mentioned earlier, I have a merchandising company, Hell's Heart Merch, going over to, as you can see on the bottom there, Chris Raffini calls it the ESPN ticker, hellsheartco.bigcartel.com, use the code podcast for 20% off. If you like movies, you like hardcore, you'll like the shirts. I think you'll be into them. Bella Canvas, they feel really soft. This is a Bella Canvas too, not my shirt, but
Soft is very important. You always want
oh, dude,
the shirt to be on the top of the laundry pile. That's the one you go for. It's like, oh, this shirt, I love this shirt. That's important. That's
yeah,
why we did that at St. Vitus. Pay a couple extra bucks for the soft shirt. Everybody
yeah,
wears it. Doesn't matter what it says on it. It's just comfortable.
yeah, exactly. I can't wear a shitty T-shirt anymore, man.
Oh no,
Like a real like cotton, like Gildan, like
they're the
can't
worst.
do it.
The worst. Fuck that shit.
when you
You know what I
when you
always used
get
to
older,
say? Dude, I would go up to the merch table at Vitus, and I would always like, if I wanted a shirt, I'd be like, okay, I'd feel all the shirts, and I'd look at it. If it was 100% Gildan shirt, I'd go, you must hate your fans. All right, I'm being
They
I'm
charge
being
the
summoned to
same.
dinner.
Oh, okay. My friend, I thank you so much. And
Thank
please
you. I
support
appreciate
Ben
it, man.
on all their outlets. Everybody, like, comment, share, subscribe, click on that bell for notifications, and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating. Everybody, namaste, God bless, be good. Thanks so much, Artie. I appreciate you.
Thank you, man. Take care.
Hell's heart, lights again. Money, power, price of fame. Hell's heart, lights again.